So first let's take a look at where this latest discovery has been made. In the east of the state of Oregon.
Oregon is now home to the oldest known human settlement in America, and the discovery is unsettling. Archaeologists found proof of early life that challenges history and exposes a dark struggle for survival. What were these people running from? What does this reveal about early America? Join us as we uncover what was hidden for thousands of years, the site that quietly challenged accepted history. At first glance, Rimrock Draw may not seem all that special. It's a shallow rock shelter on a low hill in central Oregon. The location is far from the ocean, ice corridors, or places where archaeologists thought early humans could live. For a long time, this area was thought to be empty during the coldest parts of the Ice Age. Scholars thought the climate was too cold, the land too dry, and the isolation too extreme for humans to survive. Because of these beliefs, the region was overlooked when studying early human migration. Historians thought people arrived much later and took different paths. Therefore, Rimrock Draw wasn't expected to have important evidence, so the site remained untouched for many years. When archaeologists from the University of Oregon started working at Rimrock Draw, they had low expectations. They weren't looking for evidence of early humans. Instead, they focused on studying Ice Age animals and how the environment changed over time. The team wasn't planning on challenging long-held beliefs about when humans first settled in the region. Based on what was known, they thought they would only find shallow remnants from the very end of the Ice Age, like mixed soil, scattered debris, and natural formations shaped by wind and water. It seemed unlikely that the site would contain older or deeper material, and no one anticipated that the site would challenge the established timeline. Early on during the excavation, there were some concerns about the site. The layers of sediment were very neat and well-defined, not mixed up like in other sites. This kind of preservation is rare in archaeology and allows us to understand the past better. Each layer at Rimrock Draw is resting in the same position where it was originally formed. The layers are neatly stacked one on top of the other, with no mixing or disarray. Dark bands indicate times of activity, while lighter bands show when the shelter was not being used. By layering in this way, a distinct and organized sequence is formed. Instead of looking fragmented or chaotic, the site appears whole and coherent, like pages in a book that are properly arranged rather than torn apart. This organized layout makes it hard to ignore or dismiss the site as damaged or deceptive. During the digging process, the layers of material found became increasingly older, which aligns with what we know about geology. Everything seemed to be in order with no unexpected surprises. Despite searching for quick answers to address the mounting worry, none were found. Eventually, signs of human activity started to emerge as stone tools were discovered in particular layers. These tools were not haphazardly scattered and were found in groups rather than individually. Additionally, they were found at various depths, separated by significant time intervals. This recurrence indicated that people visited the shelter multiple times. The fact that people kept coming back to Rimrock Draw had a significant meaning. It wasn't just a random visit or a stopover by accident. It appears to be a place that was remembered and revisited over time. This contradicts the usual belief about how humans moved around. It was thought that this area was too harsh and had limited resources for people to survive in during those early periods. However, the evidence indicated intentional actions, use of tools, and repeated presence at the site. This suggests that people were familiar with the area and had planned their activities there, rather than just being forced by desperation. As archaeologists kept digging, they discovered older and older layers. The more soil they removed, the more evident it became that the tools found were definitely made by humans. The layers were untouched and stable, showing no sign of objects from higher layers falling into lower ones. The entire site followed the usual rules for assessing archaeological validity. However, despite adhering to archaeological standards, Rimrock Draw posed a challenge to traditional historical timelines. Since the deeper layers at Rimrock Draw were uncovered, it has been evident that it does not match up with current beliefs about how humans arrived in North America. The camel evidence that reshaped early human history. The research took a major turn when archaeologists found teeth and jaw fragments from an extinct giant camel species called Camelops hesternus in Rimrock Draw. This camel, which was nearly 7 feet tall, disappeared from North America long before humans were thought to have arrived in Central Oregon. The surprising discovery of these remains was made even more significant by their location in the ground. The camel remains were not scattered randomly in the area. If the animal had passed away naturally, or if predators had moved parts of it around, the bones would have been more spread out. However, this was not what was found. Instead, the remains were clustered closely together in a small, compact area. This type of grouping is usually seen when an animal has been intentionally processed. Natural forces do not usually arrange bones in such a specific way. This particular detail immediately caused concern because it suggested a deliberate action rather than a random occurrence. When researchers closely examined the bones, they found strong evidence. There were clear marks on the camel remains that were not superficial or caused by erosion. These marks were straight lines in specific areas, particularly around joints where meat is typically removed from the bone. This kind of damage is commonly seen in archaeology and is consistent with the marks made by stone tools during the butchering of large animals. Other potential causes, like teeth marks from carnivores, animal trampling, or natural wear, would leave different patterns, which were not found on these bones. Everything indicated human involvement, with no other plausible explanation. The camel's location in the ground layers added more evidence to the case. Its bones were discovered below a thick layer of volcanic ash from Mount St. Helens eruption, which happened over 15,600 years ago. Geologists have studied and dated this eruption thoroughly. Volcanic ash spreads rapidly and evenly, serving as a reliable time indicator. Anything found buried under this ash must be older than the eruption. At Rimrock Draw, the layer of ash was completely undisturbed. It had not been touched, damaged, or combined with newer material. There were no indications that any later events had broken through this layer. This indicated that nothing from above could have seeped down into the ancient sediment below. The camel fossils were preserved beneath this ash, trapped under a geological time marker that could not be ignored or disputed. As a result, the fossils had to be more than 15,600 years old, which is much earlier than what the Clovis timeline suggests for human activity in the area. Scientists went beyond just the initial evidence. They utilized radiocarbon dating to specifically test the camel remains. The focus was on the tooth enamel to eliminate any doubts about the bones being linked to older material. The findings indicated that the camel existed around 18,250 years ago. This date was strong and definitive, placing the animal in associated human activity much earlier than previously thought. At this point, it was no longer possible to attribute the findings to chance. In order for the previous timeline to be accurate, multiple pieces of evidence would have to be incorrect simultaneously. The identification of the species would need to be wrong. The interpretation of the cut marks would have to be mistaken. The dating of the volcanic ash would need to be off. The results of radiocarbon dating would have to be unreliable. The undisturbed sediment layers would need to be deceptive. Archaeology does not fall apart due to one weak point, but in this case, all the supporting evidence remained strong. Each method supported the others instead of conflicting with them. The findings showed that humans lived in Central Oregon when huge ice sheets covered much of the continent. Previous models said people shouldn't have been hunting large Ice Age animals there, but the evidence clearly showed they were there without a doubt. The camel tooth didn't just suggest a possibility. It provided a definite conclusion after being studied, dated, and confirmed. The Clovis first timeline had to be revised due to new evidence. This evidence not only hinted at a minor change in early history, but also challenged the current model and revealed significant flaws in long-standing beliefs. Stone tools that ended the debate at Rimrock Draw. Archaeologists were surprised when the discovery of a camel tooth suggested that the timeline of human presence needed revision. To confirm this new timeline, they needed additional evidence to show that people were actively working at Rimrock Draw. This evidence came in the form of stone tools found near the camel remains, which definitively proved human activity at the site. These discoveries completely shifted the discussion and eliminated any remaining uncertainties. The rocks near the camel bones were not ordinary. They were intentionally shaped, not formed naturally. After a thorough examination, it was clear that they were stone scrapers with sharp edges for specific tasks. Natural breakage does not create shapes like these. The scraper's edges were purposely flaked to make precise cutting surfaces. This flaking was not by chance. It followed patterns that show human skill and planning. The tools had a consistent shape across all pieces. This consistency is crucial, as it only happens when tools are made with a specific purpose in mind. These were not haphazard attempts or incomplete objects. They were finished tools designed for use. One interesting thing was what the tools were made of. The scrapers were made from orange agate, a type of stone not found naturally near Rimrock Draw. The rocks in the area are a different color, texture, and break pattern. None of them are the same as the stone used for these tools. This means the material must have been brought to the site from somewhere else. This suggests that either the people who used the scrapers traveled far to get the stone, or they got it from trading with other groups. Both of these options indicate that the people were planning ahead, beyond just surviving. The tool's edges showed clear signs of use, according to archaeologists. When examined closely, they noticed wear patterns that could only come from frequent use. These patterns were similar to those made when stone tools are used for cutting and scraping. Some parts of the edges were worn smooth, with small fractures following specific paths. These fractures are caused by pressure on soft tissue and bone. These wear patterns have been well studied through experimental archaeology, where modern replicas are used to butcher animals. The tools from Rimrock Draw closely resembled these known results. The proof indicated that the scrapers were not created and abandoned without use. They were used multiple times and showed signs of regular use over time. This showed that there was continuous activity by humans processing animals at the site. One significant find extended the timeline back even further. They discovered a scraper in a layer of sediment below where the camel remains were found. This location indicates that tool use at Rimrock Draw happened 18,250 years ago. Sediment builds up over time, with deeper layers forming before the ones on top. The layers of sediment at this site were untouched and undisturbed. There were no indications of digging, animals burrowing, or water shifting objects downward. Consequently, the depth of the tool was a trustworthy indication of its age. The sediment was important in confirming the findings because the scrapers were found in stable, compact layers. This indicated that they were deposited as those layers formed and not added later by nature. In archaeology, disturbed layers can create accuracy issues, but at Rimrock Draw, there were no signs of this. The ground preserved a clear sequence, and the tools were found exactly where they were left. The tools were designed in a way that eliminated any doubt about their purpose. They were not just random stones used temporarily and then thrown away. Instead, their edges were specifically crafted to be useful for scraping hide and cutting flesh. The parts of the tools where they were held also showed signs of being used repeatedly, suggesting they were designed for comfort and efficiency. It was clear that someone had thought about how these tools would be used and used them enough for wear to show. After looking at all the evidence, it was clear that a message that could not be ignored emerged. The type of material used, the way the tools were shaped, the signs of wear, and the depth at which they were discovered all indicated the same thing. People were not just accidentally passing through Rimrock Draw. They were intentionally stopping there to work, process animals, and probably came back multiple times. Residue analysis that confirmed early human activity. Scientists finished studying stone tools at Rimrock Draw just as the debate about the site was starting to fade. Many questions had been asked, and different explanations had been tried. But what finally ended the argument was not big bones or visible marks. Instead, it was tiny traces that could only be seen with powerful scientific tools. Despite their size, these traces were precise and trustworthy enough to eliminate all doubts. This crucial technique was residue analysis. Residue analysis is a scientific method that finds tiny leftovers from using tools on living things. This technique does not rely on assumptions or visual estimation, but on precise chemical and biological tests. It looks closely at the tiniest details on the surface of stone tools that may have small cracks or fractures invisible to the naked eye. When a stone tool is used to cut meat or scrape animal hide, liquids and proteins from the animal get trapped in these small spaces. When materials get into cracks in stone, they dry up and seal inside over time. These traces are kept safe for thousands of years. This only occurs when a tool is being used on animal tissue. Just touching the ground, water, or air won't make these proteins get stuck. Finding residue in these cracks proves that tools were used on animal material. At Rimrock Draw, researchers picked out specific stone scrapers to test. These tools were known to be working tools because of their shape and wear patterns. This helped make sure that the objects tested were tools used intentionally, not just random stones. The tools were cleaned thoroughly before testing to get rid of any modern contamination and to ensure that the results only showed ancient activity. The tools that had been cleaned were inspected in a controlled lab setting. Researchers utilized protein residue analysis to look for preserved biological indicators on the stone tools. This technique enabled them to determine the specific animal species the proteins originated from. The findings were unambiguous and accurate. The residue found on the tools matched the blood proteins of Bison antiquus, a large species from the Ice Age that went extinct many years ago. This finding was very significant. The protein signature did not match today's bison or any other similar species. It was unique and easy to identify. This indicated that the stone tools were used to process a Bison antiquus carcass directly. Natural processes like groundwater, wind, or sediment movement could not have caused the blood to enter the stone. Animal proteins cannot be forced into the deep cracks of a stone tool without direct cutting or scraping of flesh when the animal is fresh. As a result, the evidence indicated that someone had used a tool on an animal that was alive or recently executed. This finding tied together three important factors simultaneously. The stone tools, the butchered animals, and the humans who used the tools were now connected through biological evidence. This link went beyond just being in the same place. It was not a coincidence that tools were near animal remains. The tools themselves were used to interact with the animals. Identifying the species involved was just as crucial as finding the residue itself. Bison antiqui was a very large animal, larger than modern bison. It was also dangerous to hunt. Managing and processing such an animal would have needed careful planning, strong skills, and cooperation among multiple individuals. This couldn't be attributed to simple scavenging or short-term survival instinct. It displayed organized big game processing happening much earlier than previously thought. At this point, the conclusions could not be changed or postponed. The evidence painted a clear and reliable picture. The tools were used. The species was easily recognized. The activity was accurately dated. Each piece of evidence backed up the others without any contradictions. Even if one piece was taken away, the rest of the evidence would still support the conclusions. Residue analysis did not present a new concept to explain rimrock draw, but it did give definite confirmation. Scientists no longer had to guess or argue about human activity at the site, the end of a fixed timeline. During a large part of the 19,000s, the Clovis First theory defined how experts viewed American prehistory. It established a strict timeline and required all signs of early human activity in North America to be within that time frame. As per this theory, people arrived in America around 13,000 years back. It was thought they came from Siberia to Alaska, then made their way down south through a land route between two large ice sheets. This path was seen as the only feasible way, and any findings outside of it were usually doubted or ignored. Rimrock draw doesn't fit into this timeline because of when the evidence dates back to, not how it's interpreted. The camel tooth and stone tools discovered at Rimrock draw are from around 18,250 years ago. This discovery contradicts the idea of Clovis people being the first in North America. This conflict is significant and clear, going against what was previously believed about that time period in North America. Around 18,250 years ago, the continent was experiencing the last glacial maximum, a time when ice sheets were at their biggest. The Laurentide ice sheet covered a large part of Canada, and the Cordilleran ice sheet blocked the western part of the continent. These two massive ice sheets were not divided by a passable route. Evidence from geology indicates that the corridor needed by the Clovis First theory did not appear until many years later. Due to this, the key factor in the Clovis First theory is not met when compared to the Rimrock draw timeline. People could not have passed through a path that did not exist yet. There is no geological proof of a safe or open route through the ice 18,250 years ago. The necessary environment for traveling was also not there. Rivers to navigate were not there. Edible plants were not around. Prey animals were scarce. The land was frozen, unpredictable, and mostly uninhabitable. If people were living in Central Oregon during this time, they did not come through the inland Clovis route. This conclusion is not a guess, but based on conflicting dates and geography. One of them has to be incorrect. The ice data is backed up by various studies from different places, making it very trustworthy. Therefore, the issue is with the theory, not the environmental evidence. When the inland path is eliminated, the only remaining explanation that matches the dates and physical terrain is early coastal migration. Unlike the interior, the Pacific coast was not entirely frozen during the peak of the Ice Age. Even in the coldest times, kelp forests along the coast provided a continuous and food-abundant environment. This route is commonly known as the Kelp Highway, which would have enabled people to travel south by utilizing marine resources instead of traversing icy lands. Traveling along the coastal route would have been difficult for early Americans in the past. They would have needed boats or some type of watercraft to make the journey. Navigating through different shorelines would have required planning, skill, and knowledge passed down through generations. The findings at Rimrock Draw show that humans were capable of organized behavior. The stone tools, transportation of materials over distances, and repeated use of the same site indicate intentional actions rather than random movements. This suggests that people had a planned approach and were familiar with the landscape. The theory of Clovis first believed that people arrived in North America and spread quickly. Rimrock Draw provides evidence that humans were already living in the area, adapting to the environment, hunting big animals, and returning to familiar places before Clovis tools were found. This implies that Clovis technology was not the start of human presence, but rather a later innovation within an existing population. The theory of Clovis first fell apart not because researchers were seeking a new or more thrilling narrative, but because the evidence no longer supported it. The dates of the ice sheets, the barriers created by the glaciers, and the discoveries at Rimrock Draw do not align. There is no way to make these pieces fit together, and no reinterpretation can solve this issue. Ignoring the clear data is the only way for the theory to survive. Maybe the most disturbing thought is that Rimrock Draw might not be the oldest site of its type. It could just be the first one with enough compelling evidence to change our understanding. This idea indicates that the history of people in the Americas goes back farther and is more complicated than we thought, and that previous beliefs were formed with only part of the information available. Deeper history of human presence in North America. The discovery of a camel tooth that is 18,250 years old is significant, but it is just a piece of a bigger puzzle. Researchers at Rimrock Draw observed that the tooth was found above older sediment layers, which have not been thoroughly investigated. These deeper layers contain stone pieces and slight indications of human presence. Even though the findings have not been completely examined, their location strongly implies that humans were at the site before the camel tooth was discovered. The idea is backed by the principle of superposition, which shows how layers of sediment build up over time. In soil that has not been disturbed, the deeper layers are always older than the ones on top. The sediment deposits at Rimrock Draw are very well protected, with no signs of interference like water, animals, or human activity. This means that archaeologists can be sure that anything found below the camel tooth must be older than 18,250 years. This gives a solid and trustworthy timeline for the site. In the deeper layers, archaeologists have found stone flakes and debris that resemble tools used with camel remains. This indicates that the tools were used for a purposeful and repeated activity, rather than just a one-time visit. The depth of these materials suggests that humans were present at the site much earlier than previously thought, even without carbon dating. The site is older than the commonly known Clovis horizon. The untouched layers below hint at a human presence that stretches far beyond what was initially believed. The excavation at Rimrock Draw has not gone all the way down to the bottom of the shelter yet. There are several reasons why archaeologists can't dig further. They're limited by funding, worries about keeping the site intact, and the need to safeguard delicate deposits. Because of this, only a portion of the shelter's history has been uncovered. Every layer that has not been touched could hold exciting new finds like tools, animal bones, or other clues about how people lived in the past. These layers make archaeologists eager to continue digging because they might contain evidence that changes our understanding of early human history once again. Archaeologists are discovering more evidence at Rimrock Draw that contradicts long-standing theories about when humans first arrived in North America. This evidence challenges the idea that people needed specific routes to move across the continent. It suggests that early settlers may have been along the Pacific coast 20,000 years ago, or even earlier, which changes how we think about human migration during the Ice Age. Archaeologists are being careful when interpreting these discoveries, but they agree on how significant the evidence is. The findings not only change the timeline, but also reveal that our understanding of when humans arrived in North America is not complete. The deeper layers at Rimrock Draw could contain evidence of ancient people who coped with extreme conditions. If further studies support this, the camel tooth will no longer mark the start of the story, but instead a middle point in a much longer human history. Rimrock Draw provides strong evidence that humans were in North America much earlier than previously thought. This conclusion is not just a guess. It is based on solid evidence like camel bones, stone tools, and residue found in sediment layers that haven't been disturbed. This discovery raises questions about the timelines and methods of human settlement in North America that have been accepted for a long time. If people were living in Oregon over 18,000 years ago, it is likely that there were also other regions occupied at that time. These sites might not have been found because archaeologists were only looking within certain time periods. Places that were once ignored, like mountains, coastal areas, or volcanic zones, should now be looked at more closely. The tools and techniques used to find early human sites need to be reevaluated. Areas that were previously considered too new or unsuitable might actually have valuable evidence. Archaeologists need to change their methods for digging up ancient sites because of a new finding. They can't just assume that the top layers of a site have the oldest evidence of human activity. Instead, they must now pay attention to deeper layers that were previously overlooked for being empty or too old. Each layer should be thought of as important and not just ignored. Rimrock Draw challenges traditional beliefs about the abilities of early humans. The individuals who left artifacts at this location were not just aimlessly wandering around, they deliberately selected certain areas, had a deep understanding of survival requirements, and crafted tools that demonstrated careful planning and knowledge of materials. They also hunted and processed large animals, efficiently managed resources, and thrived in harsh environments during the peak of the last ice age. The advanced level of skill and organization displayed at Rimrock Draw is surprising for the time period, prompting historians and archaeologists to reassess their views on the capabilities of early humans in Ice Age America. Ultimately, the site prompts a more in-depth reevaluation of early human history. The proof indicates that the narrative of human migration to North America is lengthier and more intricate than commonly believed. A significant portion of this history is still buried under layers of soil, ash, and long-standing assumptions. Rimrock Draw could potentially indicate the initial pointer of a larger truth, waiting to be revealed. The conclusion is evident and hard to overlook. What do you think about Oregon? Share your thoughts in the comments, and don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. Before you go, be sure to click on the video shown on your screen.